husband crippled me and left me alone in the hospital. While I was being treated, he cheated on me and got a lot of trouble. I wanted a divorce, but it was a sweltering afternoon in late July when I walked into the house, my body aching and swollen from the surgery. The journey home from the hospital was a blur, my mind clouded with a mix of relief and the heavy fog of painkillers. My husband, Mike, was waiting for me, his expression a mix of impatience and irritation. The first words out of his mouth weren't ones of comfort or concern, but a complaint. "I don't know how I'm supposed to handle all of this on my own," he grumbled, barely looking up from his phone. My heart sank. I had just undergone a medically necessary breast reduction, a surgery that was supposed to alleviate years of back pain and discomfort. Here I was, immediately confronted with Mike's selfishness. We had been together for 7 years, married for 3, and in that time I had always been the one to manage our home, our finances, and our lives. Mike worked at a local auto shop, a job that he enjoyed, but one that didn't bring in a lot of money. I, on the other hand, worked 2 jobs to make sure we had enough to cover the bills and maybe save a little on the side. But with the surgery, I needed time to heal. And I had hoped, naively it seemed, that Mike would step up, even just for a little while. "I can't go back to work immediately, Mike. The doctor said I need at least a month to recover properly," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping in. "And how am I supposed to manage that?" he snapped back. "Do you know how much I've had to spend just to keep things going around here?" I knew exactly how much he had spent. I had seen the bank statements, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Mike had spent $650 on marijuana that month. Money that could have gone towards the bills, groceries, or anything else that would help us get by while I recovered. Instead, he had chosen to prioritize his addiction over our stability, over my health. "I'm not asking you to manage everything. Just help me get through this month. I've saved up a bit, but I need your help," I pleaded, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. Mike scoffed, finally putting his phone down to look at me. "You think I'm just rolling in money? I've got my own expenses, my own needs. You're not the only one who has things to deal with, you know." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This man, the one I had promised to love and support through thick and thin, was more concerned about his habit than he was about my recovery. I had always known Mike had a problem, but I had never thought it would come to this. "I need to lie down," I said quietly, the pain in my chest becoming unbearable. I made my way to the bedroom, each step a reminder of how fragile my body was now, and collapsed onto the bed, tears streaming down my face. The next few weeks were a blur of pain and frustration. Mike barely helped around the house, leaving me to fend for myself most days. He would disappear for hours, sometimes the entire day, leaving me alone with my pain and my thoughts. I struggled to make meals, clean, and take care of basic needs while he was off doing who knows what. The pain from the surgery was nothing compared to the pain of realizing just how little he cared. One evening, as I lay on the couch, too exhausted to move, Mike came in reeking of and plopped down beside me. He turned on the TV, oblivious to my presence. "Mike, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. "This can't go on. I need your help, and you're not giving it to me." He glanced at me, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "What now? Haven't I done enough already?" "Enough? You've done nothing, Mike. Absolutely nothing. I've been here alone, trying to recover, and all you care about is we're behind on bills because of you," I said, my voice rising with each word. "I can't do this anymore. I need a partner, not another burden." Mike's face twisted in anger. "Maybe if you weren't so needy, I wouldn't have to spend so much just to get a break from all your complaining. You think you're the only one suffering here?" That was it, the last straw. I knew in that moment that I couldn't stay with someone who saw my pain as an inconvenience, who prioritized his addiction over our future. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice cold and steady. Mike looked at me, stunned into silence. "I can't live like this. I deserve better." He stared at me for a moment, his expression a mix of shock and anger before storming out of the house. I sat there, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. I had loved Mike once, but the man he had become was not someone I could continue to share my life with. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork and difficult conversations. Mike didn't fight the divorce. In fact, he seemed almost relieved to be free of the responsibilities he had so clearly resented. My family and friends rallied around me, helping me through the recovery process and offering the support that Mike had so glaringly withheld. One afternoon, while at work, I started experiencing an excruciating headache that seemed to come out of nowhere. It felt like my head was being split open, and no amount of painkillers seemed to help. My vision blurred, and I felt an overwhelming sense of nausea. I called my doctor, who advised me to go to the emergency room immediately. At the ER, after some initial tests, the doctors decided that a lumbar puncture was necessary to rule out any serious conditions. The procedure itself was uncomfortable, but manageable. However, the aftermath was far worse than I had anticipated. I developed severe complications, including a debilitating spinal headache that left me unable to move without intense pain. The doctors decided to keep me overnight for observation and possibly perform a blood patch if the headache didn't improve. As I lay there, feeling the familiar cold sterility of the hospital, I realized just how alone I felt. My family was hours away, and while my friends were supportive, I hadn't wanted to burden them with my latest health scare. Despite everything that had happened, I found myself reaching out to Mike. Perhaps it was a lingering sense of dependence, or maybe I just wanted someone familiar to be there. I called him, explained what had happened, and asked if he could come to the hospital, hoping against hope that he would show some semblance of the care and concern he had once promised. To my surprise, he agreed to come. I felt a tiny flicker of relief, thinking maybe, just maybe, he could find it within himself to be there for me in this moment of need. When Mike arrived, he walked into the room with the same air of irritation and impatience that had colored our last months together. He glanced around, barely making eye contact. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his tone flat and perfunctory. "Not great," I replied, wincing as another wave of pain washed over me. "The headache is unbearable. They might need to do a blood patch." He nodded, looking around the room as if searching for an escape. I could tell he was uncomfortable, and not just because of the sterile environment. He shifted from foot to foot, before finally sitting down in the plastic chair beside my bed. It was a rare moment of physical proximity, and for a brief second I allowed myself to believe he was there out of genuine concern. But that hope was quickly dashed. Mike stayed for barely 10 minutes, checking his phone multiple times. He sighed loudly, clearly annoyed by the entire situation. Finally, he stood up, stretching his arms as if the short stay had been a massive inconvenience. "I'm gonna head out," he said abruptly. "This chair is killing my back and I need to get some sleep." I stared at him, disbelief and hurt mingling in my eyes. "You're leaving? I thought you could stay a bit longer. They might need to do another procedure and I can't do this, okay?" he snapped, cutting me off. "I need my rest too. I can't be sitting in an uncomfortable chair all night. I'll come by tomorrow if I can." And with that, he left, leaving me alone in the sterile, dimly lit room. I stared at the door long after it had closed behind him, feeling the weight of his departure pressed down on me. It was a painful reminder of just how little he had cared, not just now, but throughout our marriage. The cozy bed he was so eager to get back to was one I had bought, along with almost everything else that had made our apartment a home. I had invested so much in our life together, and he had given so little in return. The nurses were kind and attentive, doing their best to make me comfortable. They checked on me regularly, and their gentle concern was a stark contrast to Mike's callousness. The next morning, the doctor decided to go ahead with the blood patch, and while it was a painful procedure, it brought me some much-needed relief. As I lay there, recovering, I thought about the future. I had spent so long trying to make things work with Mike, bending over backward to accommodate his needs and desires. But now, I realized that I had been neglecting my own needs in the process. It was time to start prioritizing myself, to focus on healing and moving forward. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I leaned on my friends, who rallied around me with unwavering support. They helped me see that I deserved better, that my worth was not tied to someone else's inability to appreciate me. In the weeks and months that followed, I threw myself into my work, my hobbies, and my friendships. I started seeing a therapist who helped me unpack the years of emotional neglect and rebuild my self-esteem. I learned to set boundaries, to say no when something didn't serve my well-being. After the hospital ordeal, I found myself reflecting deeply on the patterns that had emerged in my marriage to Mike. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. His behavior wasn't just a series of isolated incidents. It was a pattern of addiction and denial that he was unwilling or unable to break free from. In the early days of our relationship, Mike had gone to therapy. It was one of the things that had drawn me to him initially. He had seemed like someone who was willing to work on himself, to confront his demons. But that commitment was short-lived. He quickly grew disillusioned with therapy, claiming it was a waste of time and money. He said the therapist didn't understand him, that talking about his problems only made them worse. It wasn't long before he stopped going altogether, and that's when his addiction resurfaced with a vengeance. I discovered it by accident one day, stumbling upon his hidden stash of DVDs and an extensive browser history filled with sites I didn't recognize. When I confronted him, he shrugged it off. "Lust is in my blood," he argued, as if that was some kind of justification. "I can't help it. It's natural." I tried to be understanding at first. I wanted to believe that he could change, that with the right support, he could overcome these issues. But it became clear that he had no intention of trying. Every time he would give up one vice, he would pick up another. He traded marijuana for alcohol for, and on it went. Each new addiction seemed worse than the last. The worst was when he started driving under the influence. It terrified. I couldn't bear the thought of him getting into an accident, hurting himself, or, God forbid, someone else. I begged him to stop, to get help, but he dismissed my concerns as overreacting. He would argue that he knew his limits, that he was in control, but I knew better. Addiction had a hold on him, and it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened. Eventually, I realized that I was enabling him by staying. I was giving him the safety net he needed to continue his destructive behaviors without facing any real consequences. I knew I had to do something drastic, not just for my sake, but for his as well. I had always been passionate about helping others, so I decided to become a licensed peer support specialist. I thought that if I could learn more about addiction and recovery, I might be able to help Mike in a more meaningful way. I threw myself into the training, learning everything I could about addiction, mental health, and the tools needed to support someone in recovery. But as I delved deeper into the world of peer support, I came to a startling realization. I couldn't help Mike if he wasn't willing to help himself, and he had made it abundantly clear that he wasn't. All the knowledge and skills I was acquiring weren't going to change his mind or break the cycle of addiction that gripped him. Instead, I started using what I learned to build myself up. I began to understand that I had worth outside of my relationship with Mike, that I deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. The more I learned, the more confident I became. I saw that I had been giving Mike way too many chances, bending over backward to support him while he gave nothing in return. The decision to leave wasn't easy. It was painful, messy, and filled with doubt, but I knew it was the right choice. I packed my things and moved out, leaving behind the toxic environment that had been our home. It was a leap into the unknown, but it was also a step towards freedom and self-respect. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found solace in my work as a peer support specialist, helping others who were struggling with addiction and mental health issues. It was incredibly fulfilling, and it gave me a sense of purpose that I had been missing for so long. I also reconnected with old friends and made new ones, surrounding myself with positive influences who supported my journey. I started therapy again, this time for myself, and it was transformative. I learned to set boundaries, to prioritize my needs, and to recognize the signs of unhealthy relationships. One of the most liberating moments came when I realized that I was genuinely happy. I didn't miss the constant tension and anxiety that had come with being with Mike. I didn't miss the arguments, the excuses, or the endless cycle of addiction and denial. I had broken free, and it felt incredible. I had always believed that love meant standing by someone no matter what, but I learned that real love also means knowing when to let go. You can't help someone who refuses to help themselves, no matter how much you care about them. And in trying to save Mike, I had been drowning myself. Leaving Mike was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the best decision I had ever made. It allowed me to reclaim my life, to find my strength, and to build a future that was full of hope and possibility.